One of the easiest ways to create larger, more intricate looking cables is to pair them up so that down here, for example, instead of just having a 2x2 cable cross, which you can see pretty clearly, I've got two cables right next to each other, and they're crossing away from each other, out towards the side of the cable throughout. So to do that, I'm going to use my 2x2 tools, and I'm going to start a cable over here on the right of center 0, and I'm going to cross out and then in. And then on the left of center 0, I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to cross out, and this is going to pull because it's pulling against the other cable. Out and then in. And with these, I always pull them out to holding position. You can see that the fabric is really kind of grabbing. And again, I'll pull them back to upper work position so that they knit more clearly. And these are really just 4-stitch cables, 2 over 2 and 2 over 2. So again, probably just 4 rows between. Still tight. Let's go with 6. Okay. So again, instead of saying crossing left and right, the reason that I phrase it this way, crossing out and then in, is because I'm going to do the exact same thing for the cable on the other side as well. It's going to cross out and then in. If I were talking left and right with the two cables really working in opposite of each other, it would get a little too confusing to keep track of. So for a wishbone cable, I generally think out and then in for both of the cables. So if I continue with that, I'm going to build a wishbone cable, or sometimes called a gull cable, like this one. But the one on this side of the fabric is what's known as hugs and kisses, or X's and O's. And if you look at this, you can almost read it off the surface. This cable crosses out from the center, both of them. So they're crossing out and then in, out and then in. And then up here, the direction changes. So it's in and then out, and there's 2 of them. In and then out, and then it reverses again. Okay, so the cable we just worked, the paired cables, were both crossed out and then in, out and then in on each side, which created the effect of the wishbone cable. But if I decided to reverse that direction each time, so that instead of crossing out and then in, if I cross in and then out, and again on this side, I cross in and then out. It's not going to change how snug this cable is. It's still going to be a tight one, but it's going to change the look. So again, instead of 4 rows, I think I'm going to stick with the 6. A nice stretchy yarn is worth having. Okay, so this last time I crossed in and then out. Now I'm going to cross out and then in. And same thing here. First crossing out, away from the other cable, and then in towards it. Bring the needles right out. And you really don't want to leave them out here if you can help it. These needles are actually touching, and they can hook onto each other and get caught underneath the carriage, which is a nasty, nasty mess to clean up. And you might wonder how I know that with such certainty. Okay, so down here they went in and then out. Up here it went out and then in, so the next one will go in and then out again. I'm going to keep alternating, crossing out and then in. And I just forgot where I was going. Okay, out, so this one goes in. So the thing I love about cables is that basically you're freed from the from written directions, because once you establish the position and the frequency of your cables, you can read it right off of the needles themselves and the row counter. So if I know that I'm always crossing every 6 rows and I'm not sure if I've gotten to the point where I'm ready to cross again or not, my row counter should be multiples of 6. And that always works for me. This one looks really tight. They've already hooked onto each other, so there we go. So here you've got sort of an undulating cable that will keep crossing out, in, and creates almost a circular effect. If I take this one step further and I decide to cross twice in each direction. So for example here, this cable crosses out, or the pair of cables, out, in, and then up here crosses in and then out twice. And that's what forms hugs and kisses, or X's and O's, which is one of the most popular of the hand knit cables, and I think on the machine as well. So here's the O and here's the X. With all cables, it's important to keep track of the direction that your stitches cross, because obviously in a column of cables like this, if one of these crossings was incorrect, it would stand out like a sore thumb. And there are ways to fix it, but it's slow and it's all done by hand. So the thing about these that makes them easy to keep track of is that they're paired cables. So for example, the right side and the left side here are just 2x2 cables, but they're right up next to each other, and that contributes to the larger effect. Well, there's a similar thing happening here with this braided cable, except that it also introduces a concept that I call splitting pairs. If you look at the very first crossings down here at the bottom, I've got a 2x2 cross here and a 2x2 cross here. I'm working over a width of 8 stitches. So down here, both of these cables cross in the same direction. As we look at it here, they're crossing from left to right and from left to right. But after knitting 4 rows, the next cable does something a little bit different. There's only one cable crossing there, and it's because when you're working braided cables, you've got 2x2 crossing here and 2x2 crossing here. The next time we do what's called splitting pairs, and it's these two that cross together. So this and then this continually. And the other thing that happens when you split pairs, the direction of the crossings change. So here, as I said, we're crossing from left to right. Here we're crossing right to left. So let me show you what that's like in practice. I'm working at center 0 just because it's easy to keep track of. Sometimes I'll make grease pencil marks on the bed to keep my place, but in this case I'll use the numbers. So I'm going to cross the 4 stitches to the right of 0, and let's go from right to left first. That will define the face of the cable. And again, on the left of 0, I'm going to cross from right to left, and it's really pulling because these stitches are pulling against the cable I've already crossed. So this is where you want to be really careful not to drop any stitches. So let's pull all the needles out and then bring them back to upper work position so they don't get hooked up. And I'm going to knit just 4 rows. Let me get my edge claws back on. As I said, I sometimes put a weight under my cables, but usually I don't bother. So the first cable crossings were pairs. Right here, crossing, well, as we look at it here, from left to right. But the first cross was from right to left and then left to right. So the next time, I'm going to take 2 from the left, 2 from the right of 0, and this time I'm going to cross from left to right, and then right to left. And this will knit easily because it's only a 2x2 cable. And then I think you can see what's happening here. I'm going to repeat the first cable cross. Make sure. And then right to left again, that really tight stretch. And then left to right. Your choice of yarns for something like this is really, really important. If you were going to try to do this particular cable in a cotton yarn, then you would need to do something about enlarging the stitches. And I'll show you that in a future lesson. So this cable crosses from left to right, and then right to left. And if we get a sneak peek at the other side, you can see that you've got the same braided effect. And in fact, if I latch up alongside the cable, it's going to stand out even more. Let me just take a second to do that. When you're latching up anything, not just alongside a cable, it's important to remember that you only need to pull back on the tool enough to make sure that the old stitch can slide over the latch and pull the new stitch through. You don't want to pull so hard that you're distorting the stitches, because that sometimes doesn't come out in the wash. And I think it stands out a whole lot better once those stitches have been latched up. So you really do see the braided effect of the cable. And as I said before, the pairs of cables always cross the same. And when you split pairs, that single cable crosses the opposite direction. And this holds true even with multiple cable crossings. What you will find if you tried to braid 3 or 4 cables is that because one cable pulls against the next, they get harder and harder to cross. In another lesson, I'll show you how to enlarge the stitches so that that's no longer a problem. If you look on my blog, there are charts for this cable and for some of the others.